Yeah, so to go back to when we sort of really first became aware of this. So as a trade unionist, I have been campaigning against deportations for a number of years and supporting through our trade unions individuals who had fled persecution in a range of different countries, for example, like places like Zimbabwe. So it was something that was familiar with deportations, but this was not the mass deportations where lots of people are piled onto one plane. This was individuals being taken on commercial flights. So I was familiar with campaigning against those types of deportations and supporting individual campaigns. And then after we established BARAC, the government wanted to introduce amendments to the Immigration Act. So they brought in a bill which we could see was going to impact on all sorts of people. So overseas students, new migrants coming in, but also established migrant communities who are have been here now for 2 or 3 generations, and that included what became known, as we know commonly as the Windrush generation, and who were impacted by the Windrush scandal. So BARAC co-founded a campaigning group called Movement Against Xenophobia to campaign against that. But we also ran a billboard campaign, which was on tubes and trains and buses, called I Am an Immigrant, with real people who migrated to the UK, black and brown people, saying, I'm a bus driver, I'm a nurse, I'm a lawyer, and I came to this country from this country as an immigrant, and this is what I contribute to British society to try and counter the sort of negativity and racism and scapegoating of migrant communities, alongside trying to influence the bill in a positive way because of what was being introduced. But we've gone full circle with that because we have now the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is even more draconian, wanting to introduce even more harsh aspects to the hostile environment. So we were warning that this was going to impact on the Windrush generation. And this is not just talking about people from the Caribbean, but that Windrush generation are people from across African and Asian regions, as well as the Caribbean region, who came to the country from Commonwealth or former Commonwealth countries, invited to the UK in the 1950s and 1960s. So it's a huge number of people that were impacted by this. So we became aware one day of this mass deportation flight that was going to Jamaica. So we started questioning that, but literally we only knew days before. So we started campaigning on that flight. And I wrote this piece for The Guardian at the time. I think that was in 2016, which was entitled, How Can 50 People Be Snatched? Because literally that's what it was. The government were going for what I would describe as low-hanging fruit, people complying with the system who were known, who might be signing in. But then as the scandal unfolded, what we found is there were lots of people that may have left the UK for a holiday and gone back to the country that they were born in. Often it would be something they haven't been back, or since they left, but they've gone to a funeral or a wedding or some big occasion like that. Why they've gone, they were allowed to leave the country, but when they tried to return, they were told you haven't got legal papers, you can't come in. When people were invited during that 1950s, 1960s period, they were told, this is the mother country. You are British citizens. We want you to come and help the country recover and work post World War II. But you're coming. This is your mother country. Now, you're part of the British Empire. So nobody who came thought, okay, well, I've got an illegal status, so I need to regularize my status, so I need to do something, because they were allowed to come in. And many people came in, if they were children, they came on parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, passports. They never even had a passport of their own. And so when the government started targeting them, people didn't really necessarily come forward. One, because they didn't know until it happened and it was too late that there was this issue. And two, because they really felt there's a stigma attached to that. you know, so it wasn't comfortable or easy to come forward and speak out about it. And then you had this group of people been exiled, essentially, and not allowed to fly back. And that was even harder for them to try and fight their case, you know, when they're not even in the UK. People lost all their possessions, they lost their houses, they lost their jobs, they lost their livelihoods. Some people lost their lives because it made them ill. What they went through. But not only the people that were targeted, their entire families, because entire families had to put their lives on hold fighting for justice, trying to raise money for legal fees and flights to go, you know, to their family if they were deported or detained in another country. So all of this was happening. The Windrush scandal, as we know, broke out and became known as such. The government apologised as if that all made it okay. But the reality is people's lives have been ruined. Some people have been going through this for 10 to 20 years. And so then they introduced a compensation scheme. And then even if they came back to the UK, they've lost everything. So their house is gone. If they let's say they were a council tenant that had social housing, that's long gone. You know, their possessions, unless their family were able to grab their possessions and store them somewhere, they've lost all of that. They may have lost pensions and jobs and wages, all of those things, having to start again from scratch. And of course, it ages you and stresses you having gone through all of that as well. They've missed out on seeing grandchildren grow up, you know, be born and grow up, all sorts of things. So the compensation that the government's supposed to pay out, the vast majority haven't. So one of the things that we're campaigning on now is the fact that that compensation needs to be accessible, because the process of applying for it means that you need legal support and representation to do that. So that's another barrier to getting it. And the process is complicated. And one of the things that people had to do when the scandal unfolded and got exposed was they were told that they've got to show evidence and proof of every year of schooling, work, and where they lived. And that might be 40 or 50 years worth of evidence that they're expected to produce for every year. The vast majority of us would not have a document or a paper to prove every single year. I wouldn't have school documents now, do you know what I mean, to prove where I went to school and every year I was at my school. And at the same time, the government tore up the landing cards, which would have given that evidence and proof and destroyed them. So they're going through a living hell trying to produce all this paperwork. And even for the compensation, they've got to produce some evidence and paperwork. It's, you know, the compensation is not just for that individual, but their family. If their family also suffered the detriment, financial detriment as a result. And so the vast majority of people haven't got the compensation yet. Some people have died, so they're never going to receive it because they've died. And on top of that, the government are targeting the children and grandchildren, the descendants of the Windrush generation, for mass deportations. And people get very little time when they're going to be detained, between being detained and actually deported. And in that time, they've got to try and get legal support, legal representation. So one of the things we do is try and help people and guide them and give them advice. And if they want to sort of have their campaign in the public domain, because not everybody does it as a way of keeping up the pressure, then sometimes we lead those campaigns or just support them to get that exposure and put them in touch with the media and help them, you know, with running the campaign. And it's just never ending. So to me, this is an extension of the Windrush scandal, because the people that they're targeting now, even though they're saying, oh, well, they're not the Windrush generation, in reality, they wouldn't be in the UK if they're linked to the UK. It wasn't the enslavement of African people, the British Empire, colonial rule, and their parents or grandparents having come here because they were invited, because there wouldn't be a link or a reason to come to the UK. And many of the people that they're targeting are people that have criminal convictions, but they've been demonized in a way that somebody who was born in the UK wouldn't. And there are young people who under joint enterprise, which is now defunct, ended up with a criminal record. There are people that have never got a criminal record, young Black people who under Operation Nexus, if they're repeatedly stopped and searched, can be deemed to have done the crime they're being stopped for, and never been tried or gone through the criminal justice system, and also deported. And so you don't hear very much about those groups of people. What we see is screaming headlines by the government that these are the worst kind of criminals, guilty of the most severe crimes. But when you look at an entire flight that they're deporting, you might find there's one or two people that fall into that category. And then the majority of the others are not. And they may have, whatever they did, it could have been a burglary, for example, a theft that they did years and years and years ago. They have been punished for their crime. They've been rehabilitated, have gone back out in society, living their life and living a good life and a decent life. But it's a triple punishment, essentially, because if you were born in the UK, that wouldn't happen to you. You would be able to serve your time, be punished for your crime, and then live your life after. And so it's directly racist to target people in this way, and then to label them and demonize them in that way as well. Yeah, so this is an ongoing campaign. This hasn't gone away, and all through the pandemic, they've actually increased the number of mass deportations that they've been doing. And it's included the Caribbean, it's included people from West African countries, from South Asia, China. So they've been targeting lots of Black and brown people, basically, for these mass deportations. And a lot of people that are from Zimbabwe, families who came to the UK from Zimbabwe, actually fled persecution. You know, and all of those things are ignored in terms of the reasons why people have fled the countries they fled in the first place.
That's crazy, because